Hello, I'm Spencer Scott Holmes, and welcome to the show. We got special guest back again, Jade Lowder. He's got a brand new comic book coming out. It's a horror show, part 3. It's on Kickstarter. But Jade, dude, how are you doing?
Doing good, man. Yeah, I mean, you're right in the middle of the kick. I'm right in the middle of the Kickstarter, so it is just promotion time. Trying to get the word out, all that kind of stuff. So I feel like I'm in that kind of in the weeds of Kickstarter for sure. I'm so looking forward to May 16th when we close, and and I can kind of have a little bit of a rest because like when you're doing it, it doesn't seem like it's that much work. It is a lot of work when you're in the middle of it. So yeah, just in the weeds of the Kickstarter, man.
Oh man, well that's how it is. If anybody's never really done a Kickstarter, there is a lot more to it than you think. It seems simple, and it is simple, but there's just so much extra little things that you want to make sure that all the T's are crossed, the lowercase J's are dotted, and you got so many of these things going because and then when it gets rolling, the battle's just begun, and then it becomes that big old let's spread the word. Let's get it out there. Talk to as many people as you can, because that's always kind of the big deal part of it all. And I think a lot of times nowadays, too, we're at that point that Kickstarter has almost become one of the biggest places to place a comic book anymore.
Yeah, I think that what I've been noticing this, that like there's a lot of big, like some of the bigger publishers, like I was seeing Boom is doing some stuff on Kickstarter. And I feel like we're starting to see a lot of the industry move towards doing crowdfunding stuff. So like it's just getting bigger and bigger for a kind of a virtual shop for new and upcoming comic book projects. And I think a lot of creators are independent creators are still kind of using Kickstarter because there's been like a lot of success with it. And as such, it's just grown a lot. The kind of industry or whatever you want to call it around just Kickstarter releases has really beefed up in just like the 2 years that I've been kind of making comics and putting them out via Kickstarter. I've noticed like a substantial growth of like how many books are coming out every day on Kickstarter. It's kind of overwhelming.
Oh, most definitely. And as I said, I think it's because things are kind of moving to there a lot more. I mean, they have been for obviously years, but that's because a lot of the other places have kind of disappeared. We don't have Comixology anymore, even
point.
some of those other indie ones. I mean, of course, there's still Amazon Kindle, and I always think it's strange to me that there's so many comic book people that don't have their books on Kindle, because I think that one's always a good solid one to have, because that one's especially that's like the one, like if you have like one of those aunts or if you have like a grandma who's like, I just want to see what your book is. At least, you know that they most likely have an Amazon account. Because I remember it's like, you try to send somebody to like Comixology, good luck getting them to spell it properly.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And I know that, it got like assimilated with Amazon. And so I know that like that, that's the place now. And I kind of like mourn the loss a little bit of Comixology, because I think it was a cool thing to have something that was so ubiquitous with digital comics for indie creators and stuff like that. And then it got absorbed by Amazon. And, I think there are a lot of folks who are just like, don't want to have to deal with Amazon or boycott it for whatever reason and all that kind of stuff. And it's like, it was an option. That was something else that was paying dividends for what it was doing. And now it's gone. And it's just like, no, now your option is back to Amazon. And it'll be interesting to see if anything fills that void. But like so far, I think you're right. I think Kickstarter has become, it's different than just a source for reading digital comics, just to log in and read something right away. But it is in a way filling this kind of void that maybe was left by some of the things getting assimilated or just, going the way of progress,
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's also too because there's a lot of comic book stores that won't carry indie books and they won't place.
Totally.
I seen that a lot where it's just like, and it's just so weird. It's like, why? What's the harm that you're gonna have? You could put one spinner rack up in your store and just put a bunch of guys' indie books. I mean, you would treat it just like it was almost like a thrift store where like every single time someone bought one of those books, you just make a note that okay, Tommy here gets $1. Here you go, Bob over
Totally.
here's. I mean. And it just seems like a cool thing, but some people are like, whoa, 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 no, Marvel, DC, Image, we don't do anything beyond that. And you're like, oh, okay, thank you. See
Yeah, I really don't get what the hang up is, because I honestly, and I mean, maybe this is as an indie creator, I walk into a comic book shop and if they don't carry indie titles, I'm far less likely to spend any money. But I mean, maybe there is that one buyer that's out there that walks into a store who's like, indie comics, you will not get my money here, sir. And
Yeah.
I kind of doubt that person actually exists, but I don't know. Maybe there is that one guy that these comic book shops think that they're selling to. Which it just seems strange that there are a fair amount of shops that are like not indie friendly. So far in Montana, all of the shops here are pretty indie friendly and do lots of good stuff for the indie community. That being said, the indie comics community in Montana is not as robust as other areas, so they do what they can. But I definitely know, like I have a lot of different comic friends who are in different larger kind of metropolitan areas, and they have stores that are like, not there, not this one, not that one. And I'm like, that just seems so weird to me. Yeah.
Yeah, I just noticed that like when I do that thing where I kind of go around like you hit a store like, hey, I got some indie books. Would you mind carrying some of these? And it'd be like there's always places that are cool. So don't get me wrong, there is, but it still blows my mind. It's just like you're not a corporate business. I mean, I get it. Like if I went to Barnes and Noble and said it, you'd be like, we're not just gonna put your book up. We have a process if you want to go through it. But it's a weird one not to do. It just feels like it's like maybe the only thing I can think of is that. There are some places where they'd be like, well, here's the thing. We don't know what's going to come in on some of those indie books. Some people could bring in some real, like, risque, like, material.
Sure. Yeah.
So, and all it takes is, one of those books to circulate in there, and that could ruin it for everybody else. So there is that factor.
I think that's a good thought. Maybe they're a little worried about the content, but I mean, they almost treat it like a company store of like that when you said that like they're not corporate, but they act like they are in terms of how they're beholden to the big two and to Image, and it just seems weird that that the industry is so set that like we've got to watch what these two major companies are doing, and that's how we're gonna set the standards for printing, for the sizing, for all that kind of stuff. It's like it's two companies. They're the ones like kind of calling the shots, and I just think that's kind of, it's just like, how did we get to that stage, and why do we keep it there when we have so many awesome indie creators that are doing such cool and unique projects? I'm like, we don't have to bow to the standards of Marvel and DC.
Yeah. Well, and then the third one I always say too is Image, because it's like, I always think it's funny because people go like, oh, Image, you like, when you ask where the indie section is, they take you to Image. I'm like, dude, that is not indie whatsoever. That literally, like, look at all the creators' names on there. And I'm not saying anything against the books are great, but like, you just look at the names, it's like, that's pretty much where any of the big guys from Marvel and DC go to do an alternative story. That's like, you know what I mean? That's like, it's like if Steve, it's like saying that like, oh, Tarantino went to this, separate, movie house to make a movie. So now it's kind of an indie one. It's like, it's not an indie one anymore if Tarantino's doing it. It's not an indie movie if George Clooney's in it. You know what I mean? Like, it's like,
no, for sure.
It's past that point. So I think that's always kind of a funny one, but But yeah, it's just like comics is such a niche audience. It seems like it should just be all brought together. Doesn't matter what it is. Let's have some variety. I mean, I get if you got one of those stores that's just jam packed to the max, but some of them it's just like, once again, one little like, hey kids, comic spinners is all we need.
Yeah, totally. I know. I agree. I think you're totally right. We're a niche market. I think that like comics has the potential to be so much bigger, but I think like the way that just books in general are sold, you mentioned like Barnes and Noble and a lot of bookstores, and even just like in independent bookstores, they have hangups with selling single issued comics and whatnot, which also feels strange. It's just like, why draw these arbitrary lines to what you will and won't take in terms of the spine of a book or something like that.
Yeah.
It's like we're all fighting for a place in an audience, and books in general could just like do a lot better if we all just if they all just decide, like the stores and the industry was like, let's just intermingle. What is the point of these arbitrary lines in the sand? Like, not that. Let's cross pollinate a little bit. And I think that like the whole industry, I think that the medium of the niche market, that idea would go away, and it would just be like, no, this is just a medium now, instead of it being, it truly, it's like, no, we're this little fraction of a fraction. And I don't think that needs to be the way that it is.
Yeah, no, totally. At least that's the one big credit I'll give to Kindle, is like, at least on Kindle, everything's intermixed together. I mean, granted, you got to search a little bit harder to find your indie books that you want. You almost have to know specifically which ones they are, but they're all up on there, and they might be on Kindle Unlimited or Comixology Unlimited and so on. So there is a possibility for them to kind of mix and match both in your same collection digitally there. So
that's a good point.
I mean,
it's
cool.
kind of it's digital. The digital realm is kind of like a great equalizer in a lot of ways, because you're not. It's not about what's going to fit on this shelf or that shelf. It's just like what you can find digitally, and if you're looking for the right things, for sure. But that's a good thought. Is the digital market doesn't necessarily have those same hangups.
Yeah. The only hang up to digital is just the searching, kind of paid for sort of section. Like that part's always it's not like, like, remember like in the Wild West days of like the internet, like the 90s and then the early 2000s, when like everything felt like it had like an equal shot of being found. Like, it sounds weird, but I've talked about this before. Like, the internet felt bigger back then. Like, it felt like there was so much exploration you could do. I call it the Wild West kind of time period, where like there was a lot more options and freedom and so on. And then it's like, it's weird. Like, once the corporations kind of got in, and like by about 2010 and going onwards, it felt like the internet kind of shrank to like, no, you only go to these quadrants anymore. You don't just go free roaming to some guy's fan page. You don't go here. You know what I mean? But that used to be kind of the cool thing. Is there'd be all these extra pages that you would sort of find, and you'd go on this search and be like, oh, here's this cool guy, he's putting together all this like fan site stuff on like Castlevania games and so on, like that, something that like you would have never saw like a corporation do or anything like that. And then it kind of still has that raw feeling where you can actually have real people's opinions and so on. But I think that's a really good point. Yeah, I think that even so much as the algorithms and whatnot, when you start just like Googling for a particular subject matter and stuff like that, you're just getting regurgitated the same stuff that you've probably already clicked on before, or sites that you've looked on before. It's just like, well, I know about that site. I was looking for something different, and I think you're totally right. I think the amount of stuff out there has probably grown, but our access to it has been limited. Which is kind of a weird way to kind of think about the digital space anymore. Is just like, it's bigger, but it's also smaller. That's a total trippy thought for sure. It's like the thing, it's bigger, but there's less places to go. It's like that. That's sort of what it kind of feels like. At the end of the day, there's just not near as much like individuality and so on in a weird way. But speaking of comic books and such, have you pretty much done a Kickstarter for every single one of your issues?
So not all of the issues. When I did my first Kickstarter, I released book 1 and 2 at the same time. So because I kind of completed around the same time, and so so the Kickstarter, my first one was for books 1 and 2 of It's a Horror Show. Instead of doing, because like the first issue is technically like a mini comic, so I was like, I felt weird doing a whole Kickstarter for 8 pages.
And it's weird. You'll see people do that, and I always think that's kind of one of those ones too. And then they'll have like a story like, we need so much money. It's like, dude, it's 8 pages. Like, what? You don't got a weekend? Okay, I hate to start.
Yeah.
Here's a weekend. Here's a box of monsters. Go at it.
Yeah, yeah. So, so I combined that one with my the kind of first full length comic, and I put that one out. And then beyond that, like I did one. I think the last time we talked was I was gearing up for Dead and Still Dying, which was I had a writer on that one, and I was doing the illustration for it, and that was kind of like always his intention was to put it out that way. I don't know that we'll do another one for that same series, like Kickstarter. We might just start doing pre-sales and stuff like that through our own website, through Lesser Known Comics. It kind of seems like a lot of our fellow creators within Lesser Known Comics are getting burnt out on Kickstarter, just totally burnt out. Like this one I'm running currently for It's a Horror Show 3, you know, I think that Kickstarter does a lot of things really, really well, and so I don't want to like badmouth that by any means. But I definitely, it's a lot of work, and it's a lot of time that you spend into it, and you're like, man, I could be spending this time making comics instead of just doing this, you know, doing that angle of it, of promoting the Kickstarter constantly. And so I think that a lot of us are starting to think about like different ways that we could potentially start getting the funding and putting these books out. And so one of the things that we've been talking about is doing some like pre-sale on our own website, instead of trying to drive the traffic to like Kickstarter. Let's drive it to our website instead and see what happens. So like we're going to do some trial runs through Lesser Known Comics, and I think one of my next books will probably get in that kind of batch, just to see what kind of happens. But I think there will probably be the odd and end, you know, Kickstarter here and there for projects that maybe just a little bit too big, and you know, want to get like a different kind of funding model for it and whatnot. But yeah, I mean, I think that Kickstarter does some really great things. Like it connects you with an audience that is already on Kickstarter, who are looking for indie projects, which I think is like really cool. I think that they've developed a really good community that's present there, which is really beneficial. I think too, it's a good way to kind of almost as like a tool for a writer or for a creator. Like you have to clarify your idea so that you're almost like pitching it to an audience. Because a lot of times as an indie creator, you just make the book and you don't have to necessarily do the pitch if you don't really want to. And so like Kickstarter is almost a way of like, nope, now you've got to make the pitch. And so you have to kind of almost clarify the idea after the fact. So like, oh, how am I going to sell this thing now? and you have to kind of work through that. And I think that's honestly a good practice for a creator to have to kind of go through that.
Yeah, no, it definitely gives a lot of good skills that way. And yeah, I think that's the way, because like I always thought it was kind of weird when you see people do like every single issue they have is a Kickstarter thing, because it seems kind of bizarre. It's like, what, you can't, I hate to start saying, but it's like, what, you can't make a single issue on your own? It's like one of those ones, I feel like you should save it for special occasions. So it seems like, okay, here's the graphic novel, or here's this set coming out, or here's this.
Sense.
We're making it feel like it's a big deal, because sometimes I think there is that kind of thing, especially before on Kickstarter, where it's just like, dude, didn't I just give you money like 6 months ago? Like, like what happened there? Yeah, you know. So I think like
for sure.
there's that kind of thing that like it's kind of nice to sort of make it feel like a special one. Like, because I think I've only done, I can't remember if I did 2 or 3 Kickstarters before. I did them for like my first graphic novel, and I think I did one for my second, and then I think I did one other one that was like I called it a mini Kickstarter. I was just trying something different and so on like that. And the way that I looked at it was that I even like said it in the Kickstarter. I go, this is not like a, hey, I need funding thing. This is like almost, I treated it like it was a pre-sale. That's what I called it. I'm like, this is like a pre-order, and that's what we're going for in this thing, and so on like that. Like, and it was also double, so it's like, one, it's not like one of those ones you're gonna, hey, pay for this, and then maybe a year later you get it, or like there's some like ones that like I got like 3.5 years later, like way past the point that you almost even gave up on it, and then all of a sudden something comes in the mail, and you're like, oh
yeah, I do remember that.
yeah.
I feel like anytime that I've done, I only ever put something up that I've completed, so that I know that it will go out. You know, it's going to happen and stuff like that. And then I'm just like, the Kickstarter is like shipping. and shipping and printing is like to cover that kind of stuff. But yeah, I mean, I definitely am like always cognizant and worried about the kind of Kickstarter fatigue. And so, you know, my writing partner and I ran one back in January, and I was like, man, but I want to put out this next book and I want to do it in April, but I'm going to have to run a Kickstarter for it because we don't have our pre-sale function, stuff like that. And so I was worried about it. And I mean, it's definitely been a lot slower than the previous. And I think that maybe it is a little bit of that Kickstarter burnout. I think that's probably happened. Mm-hmm. I think that we're immediately post-tax season, and I think that's that's a big kicker. And then I think that there's some other stuff kind of going on with some of the algorithm stuff that like there was a recent update like right after we launched this project in Instagram, and with the whole metaverse stuff that has limited the people going from Instagram to the or Facebook or whatever to the Kickstarter, and so it's definitely dropped in numbers like dramatically, and yeah, I mean, so there's a good chance that I think the next project I don't think I'm going to run one. I think I'm gonna we're gonna do the pre-sale via the website and just see are we getting similar numbers there? How does that all work? And save some of that time and stress of doing the whole Kickstarter song and dance essentially.
Yeah, well, the nice thing too is that might even save you that extra 10%, 14%, fees, the Kickstarter, and
totally
the banking and all that stuff. So you skip a little bit of that. You know what I mean? So there is a lot of bonuses kind of there. It's all in your control, which there's something to be always said about that part too.
Mm-hmm.
But I definitely think so. And then it'll make the Kickstarter seem more special when you come back to it, anyways.
Yeah. When I need, if we do a project that is bigger that we need to, okay, we're going to have to crowdsource this one, that kind of a thing, for sure. I mean, I definitely think I worry about the fatigue and all of people being like, yeah, you were just on this thing. And I mean, I did the same thing too. Like there was a project that I funded and I got the book, and then after I physically got the book, the next Kickstarter got up and I was like, what? Just like whiplash almost of you just fulfilled this, and now you're doing issue 2, and it's just like weird. This just seems like maybe poor timing, but
Yeah, no, there definitely comes. Well, I think some people they'll see the Kickstarter thing and they're like, oh, I can milk this for all it's worth, and I think that's kind of what happens. Is then they go, well, I'm going to do every single issue I possibly have, and just try to get a couple $1,000s each time, and it's like one of those ones that might have worked once, but sometimes people catch on and they go, okay, well, how about call me back when you have a graphic novel, maybe. You know what I mean?
No,
wait till you got a thicker book or something. I think there's always that kind of thing. One thing I have
and I think something too. Oh, sorry. Go
ahead.
I was just going to say, your first Kickstarter, you get this thing called your friends and family bump, which is it only really happens on your first. You might have some friends and family that come back for your next couple of projects and stuff like that, but really your first project, you'll get this big bump of your friends and family are like, oh, I'll definitely jump in there for your first one, and then after that they're like, well, we already did one, so why would you need to do a second one for any other possible reason? And so then you're not going to see that they're not coming back. Nana's not back in the next one. And I definitely, I saw that when I did a second Kickstarter. It's just that audience not there, totally different audience. And when we did Dead and Still Dying in January, we funded really quick, which was great. It did really good, and we got one of the highest number of backers of any lesser known comics project, and we were like, whoa, that's awesome. We did more digital sales than we did physical sales for that book, which I thought was kind of bizarre because that's usually not the metric that we have, which was kind of fascinating. And then this book has just been so slow. I'm like, and maybe that's a statement on me, or the book. I'm not exactly sure, but I definitely feel like it is probably part of that, Kickstarter fatigue and a little bit of just maybe the timing. And I look now and I'm like, yeah, man, maybe we should have launched in May. But at the same time, I'm like, I'm hyped about these books and I want to get them out and I want to make them and all that kind of stuff. And it's just like, yeah, you could wait for the right timing or you just make it happen. And that's what I'm trying to do.
Yeah, no. Well, you know what's the other thing is, I don't know if you've been noticing this, like, I noticed it kind of a bit last year in Comic-Cons and so on like that, is that the average patron coming in was just not spending nearly as much, and that kind of went along with a lot of other people's booths, because I kept talking to people, and people would be like, dude, this is one of the worst years I've had, like, I'll go to places, I mean, I went and had a Comic-Con once where I sold just a bunch of random stuff, and I think I only sold, like, a couple of books, and I sold more, like, novelty merchandise than I sold actually books. It was really weird.
Wow. Yeah. I feel like Baltimore, when I did Baltimore Comic Con this past fall, that was something that, like, you talked to a lot of creators after the con and stuff like that. And like, how was it for you? And there, a lot where we're saying, oh yeah, it was a Friday, Saturday, Sunday con. And a lot of the creators said, oh yeah, Saturday was really good. Friday and Sunday were dead. And they were really, really slow. And, like the con had done all these like promotions of early bird and all that kind of stuff. And all those people, the early bird people that came in on Friday didn't buy anything. They were just like scoping stuff out. And it was tough. And so like Saturday was like all of our sales, any of the books I sold were on Saturday. And then you would look to see like where people were spending a lot of times. And it was like those kind of novelty kind of sections. And I'm like, what? why, like, I'm curious to know is like, when that change happened and why. But yeah, I've heard the same thing, that this past year was a really slow one.
Well, it got to the point where I just kind of said to myself, I'm like, I want to start finding more Comic-Cons, for one, that are focusing more on the books. Because the downfall started, I started just noticing the books started dropping more and more and more. And I'd go to certain Comic-Cons and be like me and like one other guy. And you're like, dude, this is, what's going on here? Like, and then you just see a bunch of like, and so you always kind of hate to be kind of like bitch and bicker about stuff. But like, it is that one, you go, here's somebody over here that's just selling like stuff they bought off of AliExpress in a resale store. Here's somebody, the one I was buying is like, here's somebody who's just printed things off like the internet and now just put them on like keychains and so on like that. It's like they didn't like create it.
Yes, it just made shrinky dinks or something.
Yeah, and then I hate to start saying, and then there's the fan art, and the fan art really I think confuses the average Joe, because they see a bunch of fan art, and then sometimes I think when they walk by an indie comic book thing, they just go, huh, that just must be something I don't know anything about. Carry on. And you're like, whoa, get back here. Like, and so,
for sure.
I feel it's one of those ones and I think the downfall is a lot of these Comic-Cons, because they've been kind of doing this for a while, because I get the guy who's putting the thing on, he doesn't really care about like the quality of it. He just wants, as long as all the booths get filled and as long as people are coming through the door paying that $10 or $20 or whatever they're paying, that's all that matters. Nothing, who cares what happens on the inside, and it's getting to that point where it's just like, the whole point of doing a Comic-Con is that I want to have a specialty audience that's coming in because they're looking for a book that they can't normally find anywhere else. Like, that's kind of the whole point of it. Once it starts to become like, now there's so much random stuff in here, my chances would be just as equal if I just went to the flea market and sold my book. You know what I mean?
Yeah, totally.
And the flea market would charge me way less for a booth. Let's just say that.
No, I mean, I think that's a really good point. And I think that, there are a handful of cons out there. And, I want to say that I'm starting to notice more that are geared towards like just indie books and the actual kind of like the makers of comics. And maybe that's just because that's what I'm looking for now, that I'm seeing more of those things. But I definitely like, when I'm choosing or going through in a year, like, okay, where do I want to go? Which cons, and whatnot. I'm trying to be a lot more specific about like, okay, do I really want to do like a fan expo where, it's just going to be so much noise that no one's going to be coming past my booth. And if they do, They're going to be so like bogged down by all the other stuff going on that they're not even going to really get any kind of like that interaction. And like you're right. You're trying to catch this audience who are looking for these books that they can't get other places, and also meet those creators and have those one-on-one kind of like interactions with comic book creators. And when it's just a huge convention like that, and there's so many people and so much noise, how can you possibly have that? It is non-existent. And so I don't think you're building those connections. Maybe you're selling books, but will they get read when they get home? Like, is there going to be that reciprocity of them reading the book, being like, "Ooh, I like this. I'm going to jump onto their website or Instagram or whatever and find more." Building that audience, or is it just going to be like, "Oh, here's this book, whoop, into the pile it goes," and never think about it again? And I think that like what you want is that back and forth. And you can't do that in a huge con where there's just so many people and so much noise, like visual noise of these bigger, huge booths that are selling like a fuck ton of toys and all kinds of stuff. There's no way that you can compete with that.
Yeah. No, and that's kind of my thing is I think just it's all the other stuff. It's like, because I've also kind of learned like, I like a wide variety of things, but I don't think a lot of other people do. I think it's like if they're into wrestling, that's all they like. If they're into anime, that's all they like. Because you've probably seen the anime one before. Be like, hey, like you think someone, hey, they got a manga in their hand, they're gonna probably like, and they go like, whoa. I only read Japanese. You're like, oh, jeez. I don't read dirty, filthy American books.
Yeah. It's weird, but you're totally right. I think that a lot of creators, and I think there are a lot of people out there that love a variety of things. Like, ooh, I'm into this and I'm into that and I'm into that. But I definitely think that there are a lot of people who go to cons who are kind of singular minded in their interest of why they're at that convention. I'm here for manga. I'm here for Dungeons and Dragons. I'm here for this one particular thing. And then it's just like everything else that doesn't fit into that, it's just might as well be invisible, When I was in Baltimore, I probably have already told you this before, we were kind of where our booth was kind of by the celebrities. And there was whatever the actor's name who played Neville Longbottom in Harry Potter was there. And so you would see all these like kids coming in that would be wearing like their Harry Potter robes, right? Their Hogwarts robes walking past us. And we'd be trying to sell books to them. Not one of these Harry Potter like fans we could sell to. They're like, no, we're kind of here just for Harry Potter. And it's like, it's just you're totally might as well be invisible. Doesn't matter. You're not in that interest. You're invisible. It's so funny.
No, and that's kind of the problem I sort of have is that when it gets too wide of how many interests are there, now it's not really a purposeful Comic-Con for like at least the people that need to be there. Like it's one of those ones like. That's why I really want to find a Comic-Con, and as I said, I've been kind of searching. They're not as easy to find. Comics Wellspring did have one, but it was like in Minneapolis or something like that. It was like, well, that sounded cool. Too bad that's 3/4 across the country, But
for sure.
But even just one that's like, hey, it's just. I always felt like if you could find one that was just all books. All books. It doesn't matter if it's resales of old issues mixed in with indie comic books, mixed in of even like newer big books. At least the upside is that everybody coming through the door is a reader, because that's my biggest thing that I've summed up for a lot of stuff is people either read or they don't read. And if they don't read, it's like trying to sell a car to someone who doesn't drive. They might think it looks cool. They might like the color. It might look flashy, but at the end of the day, there's nothing they're going to do with it. And that's always the tough one, is that I think so many people come into these Comic-Cons that they almost don't think of them, like the word comic book is there, but that's not what they actually picture anymore. They picture like, oh, I'm going to get a stuffed animal in here, and there's going to be weird stuff, and someone's going to be drawing fan art, and you know what I mean? Like, there's going to be cosplay.
I'll meet somebody famous, and cosplay,
Yeah, there's celebrities, and there's all kinds of stuff here, and then it's like, it's almost like that's what they're like, I think a lot of the average people are kind of thinking of going in there, and then it's like, as the book, it's like, oh, a book. Wow, that's novel. you're like, whoa, like, what is this, 20th century over here? Like,
Yeah, I know. It's weird that like even in the title, comic book convention or whatever, but comic is typically in the kind of like the title for a lot of the shows, but that's like the last thing on a lot of people's minds when they
Hmm.
when they come to the conventions. Yeah, I think you're totally right. Is that it's become something different, and so finding those, yeah, that's the nope. This is about the books. This is for the
Yeah.
books. It's yeah, they're out there, but yeah, I mean, they might be on complete opposite coasts from where you are,
Yeah.
depending on what where you live and stuff like that. Like, yeah, I think Comics Wellspring partnered one, but I think it was in Connecticut, so I think it was
Yeah.
actually even further. And like there are those cons out there. There's Small Press Expo that happens in Maryland. There's a couple of those, but they're the exception, not the rule,
Hmm.
of what a comic convention means. It's just like, yeah, it very rarely does it mean just books. Yeah.
Yeah, no, as I said, that's been kind of my like the one. It's like I want to find that because it feels like it's so weird to be at a Comic Con and then you feel like you're the odd man out. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You're like, it's like, huh, and it's just that one is I almost at a point, I'm like, gosh, I feel like I could just go down to like the Mexican flea market and get a booth down there, and other than the fact my book's in English, like I feel like my chances would actually be just as high as at a Comic Con. You know what I mean?
No, for sure. Yeah, I think it's interesting too because I've also noticed that sometimes when you do the one that like you're the only comic book person in that, sometimes that can play to your advantage because then you will get like, again, it won't be like the mass crowds that are there for
Yeah.
your particular book, but there will be the people that are there for comics specifically, and then it's just like, oh shit, there's only one dude that's doing it at this con, and then you end up cleaning up. So like sometimes I don't know. I think there's different strategies. You're definitely not going to build much of a community that way if you're just doing that. Like maybe you'll get some sales, and it's a dice roll at that. But
Yeah.
you're definitely not going to. I think one of the big reasons to go to conventions beyond just like selling your book and connecting with the audience is connecting with fellow creators,
Yeah.
which I think is super cool. And again, if you're going to a convention that is mostly vendors who are selling pop figures or something like that, you're not going to be able to have that kind of camaraderie with different creators. And so yeah, I mean, it's weird, but like everything, you as a creator, you have to really be selective of what you want to back and stuff. And then you know what, no matter what, how careful you are, you're going to pick one that's not going to be advantageous. That's not going to work. And even if you pick one that you're like, oh, I know this was good last year, it might not be good the next year.
Yep.
It could switch on you. Like there's no guarantee in it. It's all of it. There's a certain amount of chance, and it is the kind of thing that is fun in a way that it's like, oh yeah, I never know. It's kind of unpredictable, but then it's also the scary part of like it's also unpredictable, and I might be wasting a huge chunk of money in something that like is really not going to help, and I'm going to be out hundreds of dollars.
Yeah, especially if you get one of those ones where like just the con itself becomes kind of one of those dead zone ones. Like, so sometimes the ones that signs will get me is if like they fall on like a weird holiday or something like that. I'm like, why do you come
Oh
on holidays?
yeah,
That's never a good idea, because what
no,
pretty much all a holiday generally means is that you're gonna have all these people maybe up visiting relatives who are like, boy, I want something to do today. I don't want to just sit around the house and look at each other. What's going on? Oh, is
yeah,
this Comic Con? Hey, I got $5 in my pocket. Let's go see what this is all about. So then you get a lot of like what's
yeah,
called the looky loos, and the looky loos don't really help anybody. They only help the guy at the door. Is the only guy that they help out.
yeah,
But other than that, though, they just go to kind of look and go, huh. Huh, that's weird. Yeah, yeah, and you can tell, you can spot them from like a mile
yes,
away. That's all they're doing. They're
yeah,
killing 1 hour, walking around here, and
yeah,
yeah, that's just what's going on. So
yeah.
yeah, whenever I see a
The
holiday, I get leery about a holiday Comic Con.
I think that's a good point too. Like the looky loos, yeah, you can definitely spot them for sure. And oftentimes they're like you might have the ones that I think I've always encountered have been like kind of like elderly women who are like, oh, my grandson, he makes he makes little comic drawings. He'd be really interested in this. I'm like, okay, like
my
maybe.
favorite thing is those ladies seem to try to relate their like 6-year-old kid to you. Like you're in the same,
yeah,
like you go to the same school.
Oh, you're the same.
Sometimes it's like, are you just insulting me this whole time? Oh, you're into like what my 6-year-old is. And then there's always a tough one too when then the people do come by and then they go, oh, it's a comic. It's like, well, let me tell you this. It's not a kid's comic book. It's like,
Yeah.
Well,
let
me pump the brakes on there for you.
How many times I've had to do that? And they're just like, oh, yeah, my kid will love this. I'm like,
You probably will, but will you?
I mean, yeah, I can guarantee they're going to love it. But like, I don't know that you will love that they have this book. And so, yeah, I mean, maybe, I just like slide that one. I'm like, yeah, we're just going to put it in the bag on the board right now. And here you go. Open it up at home.
Yeah, you do the quick sale, like, don't even look at it. Just buy it and, take on off with it. I've done that many times too, where there's like, hey, this kid's looking at it, and like his parents like, hey, can I have some money? I'm like, I don't even say anything. It's like, you know what? That is not my department to say something. It's like when I was a kid, it would bother me if somebody wouldn't sell a kid a VHS or a video game that was mature rated or rated R. I feel like that's un-American. I think everybody should have their choices, even children. If they have money in their hands, that is their right.
Yeah, I mean, I think if the parent was right there and they're being like, yeah, we don't really want, it's just like, okay, well, yeah, there you go. There you go. But yeah, if the parent isn't going to be paying attention,
nope.
Like, it's not on us,
Yep.
I'm not their parent. I'm not going to do that. Yeah. Totally.
Yeah, that's always a tough one though too. Is like I think with a lot of times with certain Comic Cons when there's too many strollers coming in, because I hate to start saying the strollers is the wrong, because I've noticed that like I always feel like for me selling a comic book, like my ideal target range is kind of like a slightly middle-aged man between about the ages of 30 and 50. That is the perfect age range for a comic book like buyer. Not saying that there's not other ones, but I'm like that's the golden age right there. Is like somebody who still remembers what it was like to go to physical stores and buy them.
No, for sure. I think that knowing your mark of like, okay, this is the age range. This is going to be who's into your book and stuff like that. I found like varying levels of success would like you'll have your outliers of different demographics and stuff like that. But yeah, I found, there's a lot of that same age range. And I do a lot of stuff that's kind of like vintage horror. And so I keep I almost think anybody even a little bit older, as long as they're into kind of older, maybe potentially like Universal Monsters and that kind of stuff, there's some interest there for a lot of the books. But I found weirdly like your 18 to, 30-year-old women tend to buy my books more than anybody. It's just like that's my market. And I'm like, I don't know why. I don't know if I'm specifically writing to the audience. I have no idea. But that's just like the demographic when at a con. I'm just like, yeah, it's mostly 18 to 30-year-old women who are buying my books, and I could not even venture a guess as to like why, because I don't know if I'm writing. I write everything for me, and I'm like, yeah, so in my mind I'm the target audience.
Yep.
And it's just like I guess mentally I'm writing for this different audience.
Yeah, no, it's funny how that kind of goes too. Like, I mean, yeah, as I said, like there's all sorts of different people that can kind of like buy into it. But I always feel like sometimes you get when people get something that's a little too young, it's like reading wasn't part of their growing up experience. I noticed. So sometimes I kind of wonder. I'm not saying there's not kids that get into comic books, but it feels like I feel like I need like somewhat of an adult who's going to be really reading the books.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I mean that's for sure. I notice that there will be the people who are the more excited about like the genre or kind of the style or whatever tend to be, definitely like older readers, because they notice the references that I'm kind of making or about just like comics, and they can like get swept up in the nostalgia and stuff like that. And nostalgia doesn't exist for comics for an earlier reading audience, and it'll be interesting to see, X amount of years down the line, if our this kind of current generation who's coming up in the comics now, if they stick with it, if it's just like, oh no, all digital and we're gone with printing, what happens? It's going to be kind of interesting to see. I'd like to think that print will never fully die, because I think that I like holding a physical comic. I get such a charge out of any time. Today I ordered I ordered there's this, I got social media influenced by this fucking coffee company that they're just like comics on coffee, and they just like print comic books on the back of their coffee bags. And I'm like, I buy a lot of coffee, and I was just like, I might as well combine the two, right? Let's have comics on my coffee bags. And they sent like an old issue, and I say old, like a 90s issue of Superman in the box that I got, and it was like, pretty pristine little comic. And I got that charge because I looked into it, and it had like Juicy Fruit ads and the Kubert School ads that I remember seeing as a kid, and I was like, oh my god, this is so fun. And I'm like, yeah, that little charge, that right there, that's it. That's why I love comics, because anytime you pick up that physical book, you get one, you're just like, oh my god, this is so cool. And I hope that idea, that just like that little charge, is the same for other people, and that keeps going. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, totally there. And well, especially when you get to like the retro stuff too. Like it's that weird thing that like old ads and all like the extra little bells and whistles that come into them. It's like, it's the same way that I feel if like, same with movies and stuff too. Like I love VHSs, I love Laserdiscs, I like all that kind of stuff. It's just, there's something so neat about it, Though I will say, like comics though, recently though, I read a lot more digital books, and I think it's just because I've just kind of like I only have so much space in life to hold so many things. Once you start surrounding yourself with like big old Tupperware or like big old like container boxes filled with books, and you're like, okay, now that I have this wall built here to defend myself, there is that point. So it's like nowadays I'm almost like, I read a lot of them digital, and then if I can't get it digital, especially if they're kind of weird older ones that just are out of print or something, then I'll try to look for them in print and kind of go from there. Or I'll buy like indie books in print. But like I do read a lot in digital nowadays.
Yeah, totally. And I think that like I'll definitely. So I don't have a comic book shop in my town, and so like I'll get them in the mail from a comic book shop like 3 hours away, but only when like my pull list is X amount that like it's cost effective for them to ship it. So like when new books come out, I'm still waiting a couple of months in between, and sometimes on those books I can't wait, and I need to know what happens in the next issue. And so like I've got a couple like online subscriptions to comic books that I'm just like, nope, I gotta have it when it comes out. And so I read a lot of those too, and then you don't have the ads and all that kind of stuff, and the breaks in the flow and stuff like that. But some of that stuff I remember as a kid, and I miss the goofy 90s and 80s ads that were, sometimes they were hand illustrated, or they were a lot of the time really the ads that were in there were so focused on the comic book reader. So they were like lots of video game ads, tons of video game ads. Like I remember, like seeing Strange World like advertised. I so clearly remember the Strange World advertisement campaign in like comic books and stuff like that. Or when the Dungeons and Dragons movie came out, like I remember that was a big thing in a lot of those comics. And but it was all like really geared towards the readers. And I feel like the ones I've like the more contemporary books I've read now, they're kind of all over the place, and I'm like, is this for the reader anymore? I don't know who this ad is for. It's weird that it's even in here. And it loses that, like, I don't know, the fun of it, I guess, isn't there for like the new ads versus the kind of nostalgic ones that I grew up with. And maybe that's just totally nostalgia talking.
Yeah, well, I was gonna say, it's that weird thing that, like, this goes with just ads in general, but, like, here's the thing. It's like, if I'm watching TV and they're like, commercials come on, it's like, is there a way I can pay for to get rid of this? Like, where can I throw some money
Yeah,
at
I mean,
to get rid
totally.
of this? But then again, if someone says, like, hey, you want to watch this, like 2-hour ad reel from 1989, you'd be like, hell yeah, I'll sit there and watch the whole thing.
Yeah,
it's
like, yeah,
it's like,
totally.
if it's modern, it's like, forget about it. But if it's like old ones, it's like, oh my gosh, like watching old commercials is like one of the most nostalgic experiences. And the interesting thing is, I feel commercials, it sounds so weird, but commercials, like, they tell you specifically what that year is, like almost so much more than a movie or anything else can. It's just like, boom, like you see one and you go 1995, exactly right there. I know the place, I know the time, I know where I was at.
Yeah, no, I mean, I totally think you're right. And so I think that, you know, maybe rose-colored glasses with maybe the current generation of comic book readers or people consuming TV and marketing stuff right now will look back and like, yeah, remember that whole those crypto ads from the Super Bowl in 2020 or whatever? Weren't those great? And look fondly the same way I love Heinz tomato ketchup ads from from the 90s, because they were so good. I'm like, I just want a big bottle of ketchup.
Yeah, no, that's always one of those ones that's it's always cool going back and looking at stuff like that, and especially just old. I just love the design. I think I really will say, I think ads back in the day definitely had a lot more creativity put into them. Now you just sound like the old man talking about, like, it was just better back in the day. They put more creativity, they had better drawing and marketing, but like, no, I felt like they really did, especially like in the Attitude Era of like the 90s. Like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
You know, you just got some amazing things that, one, like, are ballsy as they all can be, that they wouldn't do nowadays for sure. But like, just like the creativity.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that
used to be a really cool job.
I think that, like, there was so much cachet for creativity in ads, and, you know, beautifully illustrated things that promoted your product and stuff like that. And now it's just like, it's name, it's clickability. It's just like, are we going to connect the market? It's so much of the market research is just like, connect the audience with the product, instead of just like, but like, what if we gave them something that was like also visually interesting? And I think that used to be part of the conversation, you know, when we talk about, oh yeah, you know, like even just like Super Bowl ads, you know, I think that's like one area where a lot of people think about ads very heavily. They used to, you know, really pride themselves, and there used to be like awards for those ads and stuff like that, and that's just it's gone. And anymore, you watch them, and, you know, like, it's where they put a lot of their money behind, but they're so on the nose now of just like, this is what we're trying to market for, instead of doing it in a creative, interesting way that's just like, oh, we're going to gain notoriety because this was such a unique commercial. And instead now it's very much like, let's just make something on the nose so the audience does not get confused. And it's like, more and more, I feel like ads keep treating me like I'm stupid. Versus that I've been on this earth for a while now, and I can read between the lines when you're making a joke and whatnot. And it's just like, no, let's just treat everybody like they're stupid. And that's kind of how I feel about ads. And I mean, you know, certain amount of what you read and TV shows or whatever, it's like they treat you a little bit like you're dumb. No,
there definitely is a lot of that, and I'm almost at that point, because like, pretty much, if there's a way to pay to not have ads on something, like, I'm like, I don't care, like, get those out of here. I don't want to see that. My YouTube feed has no ads in it whatsoever. But you know what's the weird? I think about this though, is you take this for granted, but like, commercials back in the day still updated you on a lot of stuff that was coming out. And I think that, like, the less ads you see, you sometimes don't know. It's like, you don't hear about, like, someone will be like, hey, did you hear about this thing coming out? I'm like, No, never did. I have no idea. Because
Yeah.
you're
No,
almost
yeah.
blocked from all that in a weird way. It's a bizarre thing how like ads are both one of those things that's like you want to get away from like the TV experience, but then at the same time you're like, well, I guess there was something that informed me here and there.
Yeah, yeah. Every once in a while, there was something that like let me know, like either potentially a movie that's coming out,
Yep.
or just like something in your local area. Sometimes that's going on, or whatever the case may be. And yeah, um, there was a point where they were like helpful,
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
just selling, trying to make you buy something, but like informing me.
But
Yeah.
yeah. Well, gosh, as you were saying with the comic books, you get you get a lot of singles now, and you get them just kind of shipped to you generally.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the way, unless I like physically drive, 2 to 3
Yeah.
hours, depending on which store I want to try to go to. And then I stock up, I'm just like, okay, here's all the issues that came out this last month, get all those, and then try to get a trade if I can, if that's out by then, and that kind of stuff. So I feel like I'm for new books, I'm always a couple of months behind because
Hmm.
I don't have a store in my town. And yeah, I mean, as much as I like, there are certain books that I'm like, no, I want to stay up as soon as the book come out, and I'll read them online and do digital. I'm still much more like, I like my physical books, and I'd rather
Yeah.
have the experience there first. And I like flipping the pages. And so most of the time I will wait until I can get the book in my hand. Um, yeah, so I mean, it depends on the title, but most of the time I will try and get the physical media. So either single issues for the ones that I'm the most invested in, or collecting. There's that whole angle too. Um, and
Yeah.
then the trades for the series that I want to read the whole thing in its compilation.
Yeah. No, I'm in that same boat too. As like the nearest comic book shop's like 2 hours away, so
Oh wow,
like generally I don't go
yeah,
for singles because of that reason, because it's like one of those ones like when you got a comic book, like I miss have like it's like in the moments that there has been like a comic book store next to me, like I'd be that guy. I'd be like, I go every Wednesday, I pick up my pull
yep,
list, I buy a
totally.
bunch of random books. I know that some of them aren't gonna get read because I've just so overbought for the week, but I felt like I called that, like I used to call, like, this is like my donation for society right here. Other people donate to other things. I donate to my local comic book store. It's like I'm donating to the arts.
Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, you're giving it a try, even if it never end up like actually reading it. I have a number of those that I'm like, yeah, I like the idea of it, and what I saw, and I have not read it yet, but I've got a big stack, of those kind of unread books. Um, but yeah, when you're not there, when it's not in your town, it is tough to be the single issue, you know. But yeah, when there was a store in my town, and or I lived in a different town that had a store, yeah, every new comic book day I was there, had my
Yeah.
pull list, and had the books I was looking for, and then I would grab the random here and there kind of titles as well. Um, and then yeah, within the last um, the store that I had that was here quit selling new books back in like it was pre-COVID, so it was like 2018, right in there. They stopped selling new books, and then I was like, well, I guess I'm not getting new books anymore.
Yeah.
And then only within the last like 3 or 4 years, I've been like, okay, I will go to these other stores because I got to get these books back in my life somehow. But it's a bummer, man. I cannot tell you how much I would love to have a friggin' comic book store in my town. It
I
would
agree
probably be really
wholeheartedly with you.
dangerous, but
Yeah, well, it was dangerous for me because I mean, it's like one of those ones I would go in there and just drop anywhere from $20 to $50 like a week just easily on
totally,
stuff,
yeah.
and then it's like I have the same problem that comes with the same thing of books, comics, movies, and video games where I overbuy, and I've always done that where it's like you kind of go like, well, this looks cool, this looks cool, this looks cool, and then you go like, well, when are you gonna have time to utilize all
To
these?
do all
You know
that
what I
stuff,
mean?
yeah.
But then I
No,
also
for
say like
sure.
something's like it'll be like 10 years in the future. It's like kind of like when you have a movie that you bought like a long time ago and you finally got around to watching it. You're like, hey, I'm getting my money's worth out of it now.
Yeah.
Finally got around to
No, the same thing. And I mean, I think too, like with movies and certain things like movies, video games, and certain media, a lot of the bigger stores now and movie production companies are not going to be carrying physical media anymore. And so it's
Exactly.
like I'm kind of thinking that like, man, if there's a movie that you want that you're like, nope, I want to make sure that I have this for forever, fucking buy it now. Because I think
Well,
that like we're going to see the end. Our generation will see the end of physical movies and being able to own them. And even, when you buy something on Amazon, or whatnot to watch again later, it's not there for forever. If they lose the streaming rights to that thing, even though you technically bought it, it can be gone from your digital library. You do not own it at all.
yeah.
And that was kind of shocking. Like we had this, my wife and I had this movie and we wanted to watch it again. We had bought it like a year or two ago and we were like looking, and it was just gone from the digital kind of like watch list library. She's like, what the heck? I was like, yeah, they can do that. And she's like, no. I'm like, man, I wish I could tell you that, like, also no, but like, that's what's happening.
They'll do that. Well, I know it's such a weird one because that to me is like once the physical media thing just started, it fell off the earth like real hard fast. It was like one of those ones that was like, oh, I just saw. I'm like, this is literally all I've known my entire life. It's like I felt like because that's to me, it's like my whole life I've been a collector. I collected movies, I collected video games, I collected comic books, I collected regular books, and so much stuff. And it's just like one of those ones. Like that's the way I watch most of my stuff. Is I watch still the majority of my stuff. I watch it on whether it be DVD, Blu-ray, 4K, Laserdisc or VHS. Generally, like it's like one of those ones that's what I kind of do. It's like if I can't find it on one, I'll go to the other. And now it's like speaking of like not being able to find stuff, I think of those movies. Like those movies that came out like on. They say like it came out on DVD in 2003, no special features, just kind of bare bones package or something like that. I almost at the point where it's like, wow, that's pretty much going to be the last version of it. Like that movie will not come out ever again on a, it probably will never make its way to 4K Blu-ray. It's not going to make its way to probably regular Blu-ray. It's like, that's the end right there. And that's its last variation that it had was that DVD that was just an okay copy, that they never got around to a good copy of that movie. It's weird to think of that. And it's also the point too where it's like, it's hard to buy like movies. It's like you can't just go to regular stores and buy them. Like, even like the big box stores like Walmart and Target, like and their DVD and Blu-ray racks are so sad looking anymore. It's just like you look like you're just going through and it's like it's like a war zone. Like there's like spaces missing all over the place. Like it looked like they had a great sale, but they didn't.
Yeah, they're just not stocking them now.
No,
totally.
There's no space, and it's getting smaller and smaller. I remember seeing the same thing when music CDs started to go out. Like Best Buy would have like 10 rows plus, of music CDs, and then all of a sudden you go in there one time, it's like here's this little corner that has like one rack worth of CDs, and that's it. And it's like, oh wow, and that literally has just happened to movies, and it's getting weird because the other weird thing too is like try searching for a DVD or a Blu-ray on Amazon. You have to specifically type in the movie in Blu-ray with a DVD, like all that stuff. And even then it still is kind of like Amazon does not want to show you that right off the bat. Like,
no, it's going to show you the streaming section first.
Yeah, well, sure. Not even first, but like if you scroll down, there'll be a bunch of other junk that's not related to what you wanted. So sometimes it's like you have to type in physically or go into filters and select. I want literally DVDs and Blu-rays, and it's such a weird thing that like them making it that hard to buy that.
Yeah, no, it totally is. Yeah, and you reminded me of something. There was this like point in time in like the DVD kind of. When that was the medium, when that was the kind of format, when you'd get so many extra special features kind of like put in there because for the first time, like there was capacity for those kind of features and whatnot. And a lot of movies and stuff like that would have like little featurettes about like the making of, behind the scenes, or commentaries and stuff like that. And then, I think about some of those. I'm like, yeah, there was some really good ones that I clearly remember watching the behind the scenes of these over and over, because I loved just watching like the making of, and all that kind of stuff. And then I think about like the way that media is consumed now without any of that stuff. And it's like, nope, here's the copy. This is the movie. Play the movie, then you're done with the movie. End of your experience with the movie. And if you're like, rarely are there ever like new featurettes that you can find that way and stuff like that. And, even on new Blu-rays and stuff that I've bought, I can't remember the last time I saw like a making of, behind the scenes, something new for one of those, for a newer film. Like it's just not like the common practice anymore. And that's kind of sad too, because I liked those extra features were a huge selling point a lot of times. It's like, am I really going to throw down this much money to hold, to get this copy of this movie? When back in the day you could just go rent it, also for
you had
way
that
cheaper
option too.
but you're like, yeah, but look at all the features. Don't you want to see how they made this movie? And a lot of the times my answer has been, oh yeah, that's a good point. I'm going to buy this because I want to see the behind the scenes.
Well, that was like really the mid 2000s is kind of like a golden age of movies and special features, because that's just the era where like there's so many great double disc, super special editions. Sometimes the featurettes are longer than the movie itself.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, then you get all the behind the scenes stuff. Then you get all the deleted scenes. Sometimes then that was also the time period too where you started getting unrated cuts, director's cuts, extended cuts. And it's like, because to me, I love that. Like, it's one of those ones, if you take a movie that I already love and you tell me that there's an extended cut, even if it's like 1 minute longer, I'm like, oh, I gotta have that. 1 minute longer, I can't get out there. Let alone if you get another movie, like, you can add a half an hour more into it or something like that. But like, that to me is just like, I love all that stuff. The one upside I will say is like, even though special features are getting harder and harder to find and so on, is a lot of people have been pretty good about uploading them to YouTube to kind of keep them like at least
that's true.
Easy. Which it's nice. It's like it's nice that at least exists, where they're not getting totally lost. Because that was the thing. It's like for a while there, it's like, oh, you have to go track down that specific DVD if you want that special, behind the scenes stuff.
Yeah, blooper reels, all that kind of stuff. Yeah. The early 2000s, you got so much of that stuff, and I remember so many movies of seeing it the first time, and it was like the special edition director's cut, and then you watch it years later. Just like the regular theatrical cut, or a different version that wasn't that from that. And you're like, wait, is this the same movie? And that's it's wild. And so I mean, I hope that we, in some way, get to keep having some of those like little featurettes of the behind the scenes and stuff, because I love those so much. But I also know that I'm like, yeah, but that's like a whole other movie. And what movie right now is really going to like spend the extra money to like pay someone to film behind where everybody else is just working and stuff like that, and then do all the editing, the voiceovers, the interviews, all that stuff that they do. Is like, oh my God, you don't think about it, but that's like a whole other production that is going on concurrently as that production. And I'm like, yeah, no wonder it's not fiscally, a good idea. But at the time of those 2000s, I'm like, man, there were some good ones that like I just I constantly think about. Like the one that I always go back to, and it's a terrible movie, but it was the Ben Affleck Daredevil, and there was a featurette that was all about like the decades of Daredevil comic books, and it specifically honed in on the comics. And so it interviewed the different people that from like the beginning of Daredevil. So it like interviewed Stan, and it interviewed John Romita and Frank Miller and Joe Quesada and David Mack, and it was so cool to like see, and they would show like from their studios them working, and I'm like, that's not has almost nothing. It's nothing to do with the movie. That's everything to do with the comic. But it was only available in the movie DVD, and I'm like, yeah, it's that stuff that I like mourned in a way. I'm like, yeah, but where is that for any of the new Marvels? Or I mean, I don't know, it like the new Judge Dredd movie, like or not. When I say new, it's like at this point, it's like 10 years old. But that movie, like, where's the featurette of the the 2000 AD guys and their studios? I want to see that, and that it doesn't exist.
Those Marvel movies back then had such that was almost one of the best parts. And I kid you not, I'm going to tell you this: the Daredevil Ben Affleck one. That's my favorite Marvel movie of all time.
Really,
I like the director's cut one. The director's cut one adds in like that extra half an hour to the film.
Wow.
Really
okay, I might have to.
I personally, I love telling people that too, because everybody looks at me like, "What? That movie?" I'm like, "Yeah, that's my favorite of the Marvel series. Is that one right there?" But that special features is amazing. The other one too, that's in that same. This one's not nearly not that great of a movie, but the Elektra has amazing special features on that one too.
Really? Yeah, I remember seeing that one in theaters.
Yeah, I did too. But you get a big old behind the scenes, like, goes through all the history. The cool part too is because I just remember like growing up in that time period, is that was a great way to sort of catch yourself up on a lot of the comic book like history and knowledge was with those.
Oh yeah, it totally was. You're totally right. And as much as I look shocked when you say the Daredevil that was your favorite, I still hold a candle for that movie. I'm still like I still like parts of that movie quite a bit. I thought that it was a very of the time soundtrack, but there were some like good choices on the soundtrack that I thought like worked really well. I loved oh man, what was the actor's name who played Kingpin in that? The guy from the Green Mile.
God, why am I drawing a blank on his name? I'm picturing him here.
Can't think of his name. But him, it was such a good take on Kingpin. I really liked it, and I mean, I love Vincent D'Onofrio's Kingpin on the show, like the Daredevil show. Mm-hmm. I think he's really good. But Michael.
We're getting there.
Duncan, isn't it Duncan something?
Michael Clark Duncan. There we go.
Michael Clark Duncan. There it is.
Yeah,
we got there.
It's late at night. Sometimes the brain takes a little bit of extra time to of course.
But I thought he was really good. I loved Jon Favreau as Foggy, and even Ben Affleck. I liked Ben as Matt Murdock. I thought it worked.
I like Colin Farrell in there as well too.
Yeah, I thought he did a good job. Like it was a fun take on Bullseye. You definitely were creeped out by him. I liked what they did with that character. There was a lot of fun stuff in that I really do like. There was things that are like, okay, this didn't hold up. This didn't look that great. There was some CGI in it that was like, okay, that could have been shored up a little bit more.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, that was one of the first Marvel movies. It was Fox, so it wasn't like their whole cinema thing. But I remember that one coming out shortly after the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man films, and when I was a kid, I loved that movie. And then the special features sold me on it, and I watched that DVD of just watching like Joe Quesada and John Romita Jr. at the table drawing. And I watched it for hours and hours because I just loved seeing them work. And then you got the history of Daredevil in the comic books, and you were like, oh, I'm caught up now, and that was awesome.
No, that was always a cool part. That was like with the DCU animated movies that they've been doing for about the last, almost 20 years by now. But they like, for the longest time, they had really good special features in every single one of them. And about the last couple of years, the special features have been kind of lacking a little bit. There's been some decent ones every once in a while, but before, it's like every single one of those ones, they would give you a great special feature. Once again, caught you up, gave you like, here's the old, comic book. Here's the new movie that we're doing the adaptation of, and so on like that. Then they would have, all kinds of other little special features and segments in there, and it was great. Like, I love that.
Yeah, totally.
But
Yeah,
it's just a little bummer. You just don't see as much of that anymore.
it is. I totally agree. I think that it'd be super cool if you start to see it more, but like with the way that movies are going, I don't know that it's I don't know that it's very likely.
Well, I noticed
Unfortunately.
now with movies, this is kind of like how it rolls now. Is okay, so yeah, you don't go and get movies at the normal places you do, but there's a lot of these specialty companies out there, like Arrow, like Shout Factory, and so on, like that, that take all the older movies, put out brand new special featured or special
Mm,
edition ones with more features and so on, do 4K transfers of old film, yada yada yada, and you get, and so there is this pretty neat section. The downfall is that this section all comes with like a high price. Like none of these movies are ever like cheap
right.
ones. It's like
Yeah.
you're all paying like, here's an old movie, it's $30, or here's an old movie, here it's 40 or $50, but you get a lot with it. But yeah, it's like, okay, now it's made for a literally a niche audience. And as cool as it is, don't get me wrong, it's like one of those ones, like, it's neat that there's these great versions of movies coming out, but that's like kind of like who's left. They're kind of like, there's this pocket audience that's left that hasn't died off yet that love this stuff. It's
Yeah.
everybody
No,
who pretty much
totally.
like who wanted to live in a video store or live in a library, pretty much.
Yeah, I mean, it's the collectors. And it's a lot of the same stuff for like why I think Nika and there's certain toy companies that are doing really well is
Mhm.
because they're just like they're marketing to the collectors, like, and the nostalgia of like what they're wanting, instead of like looking at like the newest uh animated TV show and like we'll make toys about that, and instead they're like making these models of toys that are like from comics and old movies
Mhm.
and stuff like that, and they're like, yeah, your audience incredibly well, and I think you've got all of us pegged. It's just like,
Yep.
here's all of my money, just constantly.
Well, once again, I feel like it hits that weird middle age kind, because that's like almost like the weird part is like that's the target audience for a lot of that
Yeah,
real
it
like
is.
nostalgic. You capture all the guys who want to see that like 80s, 90s, maybe even a little bit of early 2000s. Of course with some 70s thrown in there too. Like, and
Hmm.
that's what they're kind of hitting is like the people that still love physical media, still love physical items, and all that kind of stuff. And I do kind of wonder, like, in 20 years from now, like, maybe a little
Yeah,
farther than
what
that though.
what will that look
Once
like?
all of us are way old now and they've locked us up out of society and so on like that, like how that will transfer over. Because I always think about that. I'm like, do kids have that same attachment to physical stuff that we did growing up, or the same
Yeah.
like, you know what I mean? Like the nostalgic love for just seeing like, oh my gosh, look at this cassette here and just the box art on it and everything about it, you know.
Oh,
I
totally.
I
Yeah.
just think that because there's so much, the choice is the big thing too, is because, when we were kind of growing up, you had to hunt and seek and you only got so many things, and what you kind of found you were grateful for. But now it's like that thing that like, you turn on, just if all you have to do is have one, Netflix, Hulu, any of those things, and like as a kid, there's already 10,000 shows and movies from pretty much the last 3 years for you to watch. How are you ever going to have time to even go back in time and check out the old classics anymore?
Yeah. Look at the
Unless somebody
classics.
shows you Raiders of the Lost Ark, you probably won't get to it on your own.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. Is like without the suggestion of someone like, oh, well, you should watch these before you start consuming this kind of stuff, or to kick you back. I think that's why like there are some movies and some things that I'm like, oh, I think these are doing really good things for the genre and whatnot. So like, when Ready Player One, both the book
Mm-hmm.
and then when that came out, they made so many references to 80s pop culture, movies, music, all that kind of stuff that like you saw when that movie came out, that the people then searching for Back to the Future, the Iron Giant, some of those nostalgic things that were covered in that movie went way up
Mm-hmm.
because of it being cameoed in that movie. And same thing with Stranger Things. Like, Metallica saw a huge uptick with their latest season, and then same thing with Kate Bush with one of those older records. You know, D&D saw a huge uptick. Ghostbusters, all the things that they reference in that TV show saw like a boom in terms of people going back to those things. And I'm like, yeah, I think that like that's how it could be done, right? Like make those references. People will seek it. It's like, wait, what are they talking about? And then they'll go find it in that kind of way.
Yep.
And I think that like, you know, so there are, you know, as much as people may or may not like Stranger Things and whatnot, it's pushing the audience into these directions of like the pop culture that we all know and love, that maybe this newer generation is not aware of. And so, yeah, I love that kind of stuff where it makes reference for my own sake, because I'm like, ooh, reference. There's things that I like. But then I'm also like, oh, good. Now everybody else will see that reference and hopefully then, you know, be pushed to go look at that other kind of content and look at those movies or old records or whatever. I guess that's the hope. And I mean, I think to some extent it does work.
Yeah.
You know, so it'd be cool to see more stuff that is like clearly making those references to more stuff that we love, you know?
Yeah, no, and it's just that's the thing. Is you just gotta kind of check things out. And I think with some of those ones too, it's like I always picture I'm like, if I was a kid who was retro inspired, you know, and like you went to go like, okay, and now I need to catch up on all this stuff. You just would have to streamline it. That's I think that's the only logical thing is you're not gonna be able to catch up on all of it. It's just, you know, there's too much now. I think being in the 90s was like the last time period that you sort of could catch up on stuff, because I remember growing up, because of like I had like satellite TV, so it's like I would sit there and be like, oh, TV Land. So I'm watching TV shows from the 50s on up to the 80s. Yeah. I would catch up on all those things there. Like I literally, like, you know, you could reference anything from like the 60s, like I knew it. Same thing with cartoons. Like I watched all the old cartoons from like literally like Popeye being in black and white all the way up to like the 90s. It was like there wasn't something I was missing. But now it's like, you know, you look at the kid, you go, gosh, if you have Crunchyroll, you have 900 choices of animes to watch on there. Yeah. When I was growing up, I felt like you would go to like the rental store, and the anime section was so small. It was like 5 by 3 across. There was like, you know, all the like 15 movies in that entire section.
Yeah, and half of them were Scooby-Doo.
Yeah, they were like, why is this in the anime section? You know what I mean? But then like intermixed with that, there's Ghost in the Shell. You know, there's Appleseed. Yeah. You know, there's Ranma 1/2.
Oh, sure,
there's all these different ones. You know, so you had that there, but now it's just like, gosh, just like I just think about trying to catch up on anything nowadays. Like, God, that's gotta just be so overwhelming. You literally have to be very streamlined, and you just gotta pick it and go like, you know, it's almost there used to be a period where you're like, you know, I want to catch up on all the X-Men comics. You could do that nowadays. There's like, boy, that'd be an undertaking. There's 3-4 years. Yeah,
they put out like I don't even know how many different titles of X-Men every year. There's like 4 or 5 at this point, and it used to be, you know, when I was a kid, I think there were maybe 3. There was like Uncanny, New, and then just like the standard X-Men. Or maybe it was Astonishing, but like so there were like the 3 titles, and so there were, you know, but they were all different timelines, so that like you could pick and choose which one you wanted to do potentially and follow. But now there's like 4 or 5 different X-Men titles, and they're all working similar timelines, but like cross-pollinating characters and all that kind of stuff. You're like, yeah, I don't know how anybody would keep up with it if you're trying to read all of the titles. No, for sure. I think that the choices are just like so overwhelming. How do you weed through that to find, you know, quality? And, you know, that being said, there are a lot of there's so much quality. There's, I mean, there's equal parts crap stuff that's just, it's no good. And it was just created by someone who's just clocking in, clocking out every day. But then there is the stuff that is legitimate, like artful and really well done and all that kind of stuff. And to to weed through the crap to get there, it is tough. And so I think that, like, there are channels out there or people who are like curating stuff and saying like, hey, check this out. If you like this kind of stuff, you might like this. And I think that, like, that kind of stuff, I used to like, oh, what's the point of this? I like to make up my own mind. I'm like, you know what? The more I'm like, I don't have time to literally watch everything and decide, was this worth my time or not? And I'm like, some of those shortcut things of like weeding through the noise, get to the good stuff. I'm all for now, because they're they're helping me navigate, so I'm not wasting my time on stuff that I'm like, I'm not gonna like this. But I just blew money and time on this thing that I do not want to watch.
Yeah, no, you definitely almost kind of have to, because one, there's just too much stuff, but then there's too much good stuff too at the same time. So you got to just be
it's also
specific.
True. Yeah,
it's like that thing. It's like when you get a video game stack going, and then you realize you're like, I do not have time. What's the game I want to play the most? And then put the rest of them away in a drawer. Maybe you'll come back to them one of these days, but sometimes you have to just do that. Be like, focus at the task at hand and go from there. But yeah. I mean, it's like, well, is it a bad thing? I don't know. I don't really think so. I think there's something to be said about when you had less choices, because it made each choice seem way more interesting.
That's true. I also think too is, like I was just mentioning, like cutting out, like watching the bad stuff. But I start thinking about it. I'm like, yeah, but like I miss the days of kind of like classic TV and whatnot, of where you're just channel surfing and you start watching a movie because after this movie, the thing that you really want is going to be coming on. And so you're kind of like forced to watch this crappy movie, and it just may not be your thing at that time, but you're giving it a shot, and maybe that becomes your thing, but you don't know until you try it. But like back in the day, you just kind of had to slug through that stuff, and you were forced in a way to get to what you wanted, that you were going to watch the stuff that you had no interest in. And now you don't have to do that. You don't have to watch the stuff that you're not interested in anymore. And so I feel like your taste does this. It just stays in that one direction instead of ever growing. And so almost going back first full circle to kind of what we were talking about the younger folks coming to cons who are like singular minded, like I want manga and that's it, or that kind of stuff. I think that's probably a product of the fact of like the choices of just like how things are so curated down that it's like, this is the one track that you don't have to expand your brain and look at these different choices anymore. You can do the one thing, and that's fine. And that's it.
Well, that makes total sense, because it's like watching cartoons back in the day. You literally would get like a mix match, because you would be watching, you would get your anime, but then you'd watch it alongside American cartoons, but then you'd watch it alongside cartoons from previous decades. So you're watching 70s cartoons, you're watching 30s cartoons, and it's all intermixed together. That you didn't like, you just looked at it as like, I'm just watching cartoons.
It's just cartoons. I mean?
Like,
yeah, totally.
And that's how I've always feels like. That's why it's always weird to me when people get like I only read manga, or I only read like comics and so on. I always had all of them together, so it was all the same. It's all comics, it's all cartoons. Like I just to me, I can intermix them back and forth, and that's just kind of what it is. It just gives me more wide variety of genres and so on.
Totally.
But I
agree.
think it is it, because I think people that sounds about right. People, they fall into a path, and why leave that path? You know what I mean? They're not forced to watch shows. Like, cause you remember being a kid, like you'd watch shows, you hated the show, but you had nothing to do for the next hour, so you're gonna watch it. There's nothing else on TV.
I guess I'm watching this. Yeah.
I guess I'm watching it. So you would put yourself through like punishment every single time, just to get to the place you wanted.
Just to get to that.
Or I remember Edgar Wright said this once on a podcast. The director Edgar Wright from like Scott Pilgrim and like Shaun of the Dead and stuff. He said he's like the thing about watching TV back in the day is like that, like kind of made it sort of special. Is like you might be watching kind of a movie that maybe is not that great, but because it's like that's all you got to do and so on like that, you watch it. But then you find maybe the overall movie is not good, but there's this cool car chase in it. There's this cool extra scene here, so you'll find these things in it that, like, nowadays you would just be like, the movie's not that good. 20 minutes into it, switch to something else. But maybe if you let it build up, there was some moments in there that at least you could take that away as being like, oh, that's pretty neat. Maybe the rest of the movie wasn't there, but there's some special stuff to still have at it.
I think that's a good point. And yeah, we've kind of shortchanged ourselves in a way that like we're not going to get to experience that moment from one of those throwaway movies that like, yeah, in general, this is not going to be on your watch list. It's not going to be on a recommended watch list, you know. But that's what was on TNT at 4 p.m. when like before, you know, the movie that you wanted to watch, the cartoon.
Yeah, before WCW.
Yeah. And you're just like, I guess I'm watching this. And then you see that one scene, you're like, oh man, that was really cool, or you know, something along those lines, and that sparks some creativity in you, and you grew just that much, instead of just always being in that one path, for sure.
Yeah, no, I know that's happened to me so many times where it's like there's certain movies, I can't think of one off the top of my head, but like where like maybe the movie wasn't that great, but there's like a takeaway moment in it that like you'll be like,
Totally.
oh man, that takeaway moment was so cool. You know, it was worth the price of admission or whatever the time you spent on it, and that's the cool part there. But yeah.
Yeah.
But
Totally.
yeah, Jay, well, I don't want to. I know it's getting probably leaving later over where you're at right now and so on like that. So we had a good old comic book run here that went into movies and all sorts of physical media because I think it kind of relates and so on. But I'll put the links for It's a Horror Show. You got the Kickstarter going on right now. We'll get that going. Do you have a website or anything else you want to direct people to?
I think the main one would be, you know, I think Instagram is the best way to kind of like keep in touch with kind of what I'm doing and new projects and stuff like that. So that's just at Jade Lowder at Instagram. I do have a website and I try and keep it as, you know,
yeah, I know
as much as I can. But it's jadelowder.com. And I usually try and link any new projects and stuff that I'm working on and new art and stuff like that there. But yeah, the Kickstarter is the kind of main thing that I'm still trying to grind away on that one. But yeah, the link for that is also at my website. So you can check out more of my work and stuff like that there, comics and paintings and all kinds of cool stuff. And then the link is there as well.
Sweet. So yeah, actually, there's one more question I want to ask you. I totally spaced out on
Sure.
it. But,
yeah.
Because your new book's all in color and everything like that. Because I was used to when your initial one was all black and white. So are you doing all the coloring on this and so on?
I did, yeah. So the first kind of book, I wanted to just do it in black and white, as a matter of just like getting the book out and stuff like that. I wasn't very practiced at doing coloring and stuff like that. At that point, it was still like a really new skill. And in terms of all the other skills that I do with drawing and stuff like that, the coloring, the digital side is probably still the newest. But then I had practiced and I'd colored a couple other books. And so when it came time for this one, I was like, you know, this book's has a fair amount of blood in it, and I thought it would look weird if I didn't do a color pass. And so I was like, no, I wanna do colors for this specifically because I want that blood to really shine. You know, this new book is it's a kind of a homage to like 80s slashers and revenge films, kind of like, you know, like Last House on the Left or Kill Bill a little bit, and in that kind of genre. And so I was like, you know, it's got a good amount of blood and guts in it, and I wanted to showcase that well. So I just figured it had to be in color. And, you know, I took a lot of color inspiration from books like Plush by Doug Wagner and Daniel Hilliard, or, you know, I love The Watchmen, and I love just the saturated color in that and contrasting color. And so those, like, whenever I'm doing colors, I've always just got like a couple of copies of books that I like next to me that I like the colors, so I can always kind of refer to like, how did they do this kind of a scene, and go back. So this one's color because I think it needed it. I just thought, gonna do something with blood. I want to play that blood up for sure.
Well, you know what, and I always thought too, like coming from a black and white background as well, is when I go to do like the toning and like just like the extra shading that is required in black and white, like I think like the average person doesn't think about that, but I'm like, that to me, I always felt like I probably could do this just the same amount of time if I did it in color, because instead of having to go through all the time.
Yeah, it's a lot.
There's also other abilities too that color has, because you can always do, like, I always call it the Ren and Stimpy, because I always think about that, because when they have like those emotional color flashes, like in that show, you can
Totally.
use color in that way. That, like, if black and white, you don't have that option, and you always feel like you can't just leave it blank where it just looks like you didn't draw the black background in the black and white. You got to always have something where, like, color, you can utilize color to, like, do a lot more things
To
for
fill
you.
that in, yeah,
help out.
totally.
Yeah, to fill in, like, emotions and moods and all that kind of stuff that you could get away with. That if you did it in a black and white book, it would just look like something's missing.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think that, like, there are really good examples of black and white books that do amazing things that I'm like, yeah, I don't think you could do this in color, and backwards and forwards. And I think that future projects, I might do something that's in black and white, and I might do something that's all in color, or parse down color so it's only, like, really limited palette, or maybe something that's more kind of like grayed out instead, and simple colors like that kind of a thing. My kind of strategy for making this is always like, whatever the project feels like it needs is what I'll do. I never want to say, I only make comics like this. I think that, like, whatever the project needs, that's what I'll do for that particular project. I think that, like, my drawing style and whatnot, the kind of characters I draw, maybe there's a style that's like that is consistent between all those things, and maybe there's not. Again, it's just like, my first book, The Date, that was black and white. A lot of those characters I didn't give a whole lot of extra facial features to. I kept them, like, really, really simple and whatnot. As like this idea of black and white simple books and stuff. And then when I got to this one and I knew I was going to do some more blood and whatnot, I wanted there to just be more emotion on their faces. And so I was like, oh, I need to give them, more detail in the face, so that, like, when a fire poker is going through their head, it looks like a fire poker is going through their head.
Yeah.
And it reads right. So, like, I changed my style so that the story would make sense and that, like, it would work with it. So yeah, I kind of always I try and match whatever I'm, the idea of the book to how I do the book, I guess, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I totally get that there and so on. And no, it's just cool to see different styles being tried out and whatnot too. And so yeah, the coloring's coming along great. Like, just all the images you got up there on the Kickstarter one, that looks solid. You know what I mean? And yeah, that was the one thing I was like, I want to mention the color part too, because it's always interesting to see when that kind of changes up and so on. And that's why I always kind of thought, it's just, because, sometimes it's amazing how much time and effort you'll put into, like, that, the toning and all that kind of stuff. The stuff that, like, the average person just doesn't really notice how that, like, sort of works, and how that has to be picked and properly, placed in, like, black and white books to kind of make that pop, and, between just being a straight black and white book to having that sort of a Tony / grayish look to it and so on. But yeah, no, I think just having the color one's also going to be too. It's like, that probably made it much more refreshing and just changed up the formula, which I think that's always one of the key things in all creative projects, is being able to switch it all up and make it feel fresh and brand new again.
Yeah, it totally did. And, I definitely spent a lot of time going over, like, the palettes of each of the pages and how the colors are going to look and stuff like that. I have so many saved versions of colors, of, like, version 1, version 2 is just, like, warm, cool, maybe let's try this one more purple, let's try this one more, green, and see what happens. And so I try lots of different, like, combinations just to see what makes the most sense. And then also, just, like, there's some of it's just, like, personal preference. And I was like, no, I like it. Does this help the story the most? I don't know. But sometimes the decision is, like, I like how it looks, and so I'm going with what I think looks the best sometimes, and not always like, oh, this makes the most sense. It's like, but this looks better.
Yeah. At the end of the day, I think that's the key thing. Like, do you like the way it looks? That should be the most important part. It's kind of like the other part. It's like, is it fun? Is it enjoyable?
Yeah,
I always like the
totally.
key thing.
Is it fun?
I think that stuff is. But well, cool, Jade. Well, good talking to you as always, talking all that comic book fun stuff, physical media, and all that stuff. But make sure to go out and check It's a Horror Show. It's going to be badass. It's up there on Kickstarter. It looks like, you still got like 22 days left or something as of this recording.
Yeah, we
yeah,
still have a little ways to go left, and there's tons of really cool tiers on there that we did. We did some like a T-shirt option that's to go around. We've got I made a poster that's kind of like a retro throwback poster to the good old days of slasher films and those posters and whatnot. And yeah, and there's some other cool stuff in there that you can check out. Some fun tiers, and you can get all of my books that I've done so far also available. So the black and white werewolf book, along with this new colorful bloody mess called The Breakup.
Perfect. Yeah, so there's all kinds of great stuff there. Well, Jade, you take care now. We'll get that Kickstarter finished up. Make sure it tops off there, and next thing you know, you'll be working on your next book and working its good way through there. But till then, you can always go to oldmanorange.com. That's where you'll find more podcasts, comic books like Pizza Boys, all my old animations, and all the other fun stuff I do there. And then, as I said, Jade, I'll put all those good links of yours in the show description. But till then, I'm Spencer Scott Holmes.
And I'm Jade Lowder.
And we will see you some other time.